other issue where it went long. And the kids actually had ice in their mouths, so you couldn't see their breaths in some of the films. But yeah, I mean, he didn't act all that great off camera.
Yes.
And I think, Roy Scheider, a lot of people, when they see the way a movie's being filmed or being handled when you're a professional, and it's going to be a junk show, tensions get high, because you can see what's coming. And, at that point, like I said, he was really starting to break some ground. He wasn't an unknown actor by any means, but after Jaws, he had made it. And, he didn't have, none of the cast members had a great time making the first one. They had a great time with its critical success, but I will say that watching Roy Scheider go at it, like you said, Zach, he certainly didn't mail it in. Hendricks, who was the deputy that was brought back, Jeffrey Kramer, he actually turned down the script originally. He didn't want to do it because I'll call it like Walter Koenig syndrome. He didn't have enough to do. So they amped up his role a lot more and was on that boat a lot more. So he got more to do in the movie. What was really sad was Murray Hamilton. They filmed all of his scenes rather quickly because he was very sick and he died shortly thereafter, the filming of the movie.
Now, Ken, not to jump ahead, but I had heard that his wife was the one who was sick and he wanted to spend time with her. And they were going to actually get him in Jaws: The Revenge, but he died right before that movie came out.
Oh, I thought he died a lot sooner than that. Maybe I had it wrong. I'll have to look it up.
But you're right. You're right, though. They did film all his scenes all together near the start, so because he needed to go attend to his family. That was my understanding of what I read. But
yeah, and maybe I have that wrong, as it's possible. I've been wrong before. But at any rate, those were kind of the key characters. And then, you had some folks in the movie like Keith Gordon. You saw him in Christine. You saw him in Back to School. He was Rodney Dangerfield's son. So he had some he was kind of a small actor that got kind of big after that. The rest of them really not so much. And Jeffrey Kramer, who played Hendricks, wound up to be like a big producer guy in Hollywood. So he's had a pretty good career. But it's just an interesting movie where, there weren't a lot of people that were quote unquote who came out of it, bigger or better like they did coming out of Jaws. Look what it did for Richard Dreyfuss. Look what it did for a lot of those guys. This movie, not so much. Those teenagers kind of fall into the same category of, hey, once in a while, you might get a star like Kevin Bacon out of Friday the 13th or something along those lines, or Jamie Lee Curtis, she makes it big. But then a lot of these kids, they really didn't go too far. So the movie, I think was well pointed out. You didn't get a lot of time to get to know and appreciate these characters. Or who they were, because it moved so fast. This was an action slash movie. It stands as its own, I think, as you're right. You said what'd you say, the third best shark movie, better than Deep Blue Sea? Not as good as Deep Blue Sea?
I'd say Jaws, Deep Blue Sea, and then probably Jaws 2.
Sharknado's not in there.
Sharknado is not in there.
What about the Meg?
I haven't seen the Meg.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Oh.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it a couple times.
Is it better than Jaws 2? That's because that's the litmus test.
No.
Okay.
No. I was hoping it would be. It's. You know what? It is kind of Jaws 2-y, if I can say it like that. And what I mean by that is, it's more fun, light, with some scares in it or whatnot, but it's like Jaws 2. It's not a very believable premise, so you just kind of have fun with it.
Well, I'm just glad they didn't remake Jaws. They made the Meg. I'm like, fine, do that. Don't remake Jaws. Go make a movie like the Meg, because it serves the same function as Jaws for the modern audiences, but you can't remake Jaws.
I wonder if that would be the first remake of a film I love that I purposely wouldn't go see.
What if they made a scene-for-scene remake of Jaws?
No, I think it's the actors that make that movie. It's the actors. It's you can put CGI in there, but they don't show the shark enough to make a difference. And how can they recapture those moments? It's
Russell Crowe as Quint, okay. Michael Fassbender as Brody, and
no,
not Michael Fassbender.
Oh God.
And James McAvoy as Hooper. So basically the new X-Men cast and Russell Crowe. And
Patrick Stewart as Quint.
Patrick Stewart is too old to play Quint. Okay, and he's already played
young.
Moby Dick. He's already played Moby Dick. He's already played Captain Ahab in
that whale job that he did.
Anyway, but mentioning the kids, why is Mike Brody like 10 years older than he was in the last movie, even though it's 3 years later? Can someone explain this to me? Because he was like, I want to say he was like 9 in the first film. This is 3 years later, and he's 17 now. Does anyone have an explanation for that? Is he Klingon? Why is he aged so fast?
There is no explanation.
Shut up, Zach. It's a good movie.
This is not a good movie, Brandon. Okay, so let's just and to wrap it up, you guys were saying it's a slasher, it's quick and all this. I was gonna say like about an hour in, this movie just runs out of steam. I think they had intriguing stuff at the beginning. You had, the Brody stuff, the town stuff, the tension there of like, oh God, he has proof, but they don't believe him, But then you get to the fact where he's fired and these kids are floating on the water, and it's like the last 30 minutes of this movie is just like, okay, all right, they're floating around. There's the shark in the water. Okay, he's going to save them at some point. Like there's so much tension and engagement in the first Jaws, and this one is just the opposite of that, and it just kind of cruises into the end without any kind of momentum, I feel.
Well, I think, they gave it the good college try. And I have to say that even though I figured out how they were going to kill the shark at a very young age, very early on,
Chekhov's electric cable.
Chekhov's electric cable, yes.
It was pretty clever.
Well, if I cared about the kids, Ken, then maybe I would have been like, oh no, I hope they don't kill that other kid who looks kind of like the other one who's dating the girl who I think is the cousin of so-and-so. Like I just didn't know who they were and I didn't care other than the 2 Brody kids.
Well, they weren't likable. They were not. That was the other problem was that they were yelling and screaming at each other, whatnot. And I mean, they were just kids goofing off. I get it through most of the film, but the fact that all these things kind of crash together and they're just floating, it just wasn't believable in any sense of the word, and that's even when. I thought I do have to say the one funny line I think in this is when they, Brody's just the older son there's just floating in the water and they rescue him at the last minute and the shark's mouth goes up against the sailboat. That was kind of a cool scene, filmed very well. But later on when Chief Brody finds them on the sailboat and he's like, oh, thanks Christ, and he's like, Sean's with them. It's all right, wasn't it? It's all right that I brought him out there. It was okay, wasn't it?
I didn't know, Dad.
Yeah, it's okay. I brought Sean's out there. He's like, what? And I was almost like, yeah, if Sean wasn't there, I would have just been like, well, get in the boat. We'll head back.
Yeah. Screw those other kids.
I don't care about those kids.
Screw those other kids. Screw those other kids.
Well, sharks got to eat. Sharks got to eat.
Ken, any final thoughts on Jaws 2?
Fascinating making of of all the sequels. I think it's the best one by a long mile, by the way. I would recommend, and I'm really curious if you guys, if you ever find the time, because I know our lives are busy, but if you could read the novel, I'm just curious, not what you think of it as a movie, but what you think of it as a story, and just, because it's just that much different. You'll find some similarities in it, but it was good. And if you do read that book, The Making of the Hollywood Sequel, especially you, Brendan, who really, really liked this book, this movie, I think that you'll appreciate it because the behind the scenes on this one was just wild and crazy. And what the kids get into, the actors and all that stuff, I mean, it was a whole nutty scene, the whole making of it. So it's very, very different than the original Jaws. This was like a whole different world. You probably heard about the making of Caddyshack with all the kids. Same boat with this. Fascinating reading.
Awesome. Yeah, my final thoughts on this. I like this movie a lot. I don't like it enough that I would just put on Jaws 2. But whenever I watch Jaws, I'll watch Jaws 2. I don't know. I guess not every time, but if I do a rewatch of the Jaws movies, I'll watch all 4. But I might put on Jaws and just leave it at that. But I'll never just put on Jaws 2. So, but I'd still enjoy it a whole heck of a lot. But it is a pale. It doesn't hold a candle to the first film because it's completely different.
It is.
And I enjoy it on a completely different level. And it's like, if you go back in our franchise fatigue, a podcast feed, you can go back and you can listen to us discuss our series on Halloween, which we originally released with the Talk Film Society. You can actually listen to those 11 episodes, because that's where Zach and I started our podcast. And it's when I go to Halloween 2, I prefer Halloween 2 to Halloween, but it's a very different film, and I like that different take of what Halloween 2 was, right? And I really enjoy that film, and that's kind of what I see here. Like, Halloween 2 and Halloween are like Jaws 2 and Jaws. They're completely different calibers, they're completely different types of films, and one is more paced, and one is more tense, and one is more just about the slasher killing. And while I prefer that aspect for Halloween 2, I don't prefer it for the Jaws one.
It's a great analogy, though. I think you hit that on the head. Yeah.
When you get into... Now, the interesting thing about rating this type of film is, like in one of our last franchises, we talked about the Godfather series, and we're like, it's not as good as the Godfather. It's not as good as the Godfather. But Jaws 2 is kind of fascinating, because it's like, when you rate this film, are you rating it against Jaws, or are you rating it against Jaws 3 and 4?
Yeah.
Because, again, those are entirely different scales.
That is what I wanted to say for my final thoughts. It's if there was just Jaws and Jaws 2, you could have been like, all right, it's kind of like a epilogue to the first one. You get the wrap up with Brody and his family and the town. Sure, unnecessary but harmless, okay. And it could just be this extra sequel when you buy Jaws on Blu-ray. It comes with Jaws 2, the whole Jaws experience, right? But then there is Jaws 3, and there is Jaws 4, and it kind of pulls it down. Kind of like, Batman Forever. I enjoy Batman Forever for what it is, but it gets pulled down by the fact Batman and Robin exists, one of the worst movies that has ever been made. And I feel like that's kind of the effect going on here with Jaws 2. Like, if it was just Jaws and Jaws 2, it would have been one thing, but also, Jaws is one of the best films of all time. So it's in this, like you said, Brandon, it's in this weird middle ground, and it makes it hard to rate. So Kid, as our resident Jaws expert, out of 5 dorsal fins, how many dorsal fins would you give Jaws 2?
2.5. So, one of the dorsal fins gets nibbled off.
Or electrocuted off.
Yeah, or electrocuted off. Yeah, I mean, it's on its own, it's not terrible. It is hard to pull Jaws out of the equation. Because the cinematography is interesting. The perspectives that they actually did put a saddle on that mechanical shark to get that point of view shot, where put the cameraman on the back of the shark so that they can get that shot where he's approaching the sailboats, which I thought was. I read about that and I said, that's pretty damn clever. And the music, it's John Williams.
Yeah.
Great score.
John Williams didn't even come back for Superman 2, and he came back for Jaws 2. Okay.
Well, that's right. So, I mean, he, so there's aspects to the film that make it enjoyable. Like I said, it just got more and more crazy. And it just, like I said, it got harder and harder to suspend disbelief for me. But, it's got Roy Scheider performing, I think, at a high level. It's got some elements in it that I do enjoy. I like Murray Hamilton. So that's why I say it's 2.5 on its own. You can't compare it to Jaws. I don't know if it's even fair. Comparing this to Jaws is almost like comparing the other 2 sequels to this. It's almost the same scale here.
Proportionally, yeah.
Proportion, yeah. So it's a different. So I'll say 2.5.
As for me, I agree with you, Ken. I'm going to give it 2.5 dorsal fins. I think, although there are a lot of missed opportunities in the first half of the film, I feel like that's where the strength of it is. Kind of picking up where we left off with where the island is, where Brody is as a character. We saw he was Man of the Year, right? That little trophy in his office from 1975 for killing the shark, and now we see he's fired and disgraced, and so that kind of stuff is a strength. And the end, though, I just don't care about all these teenage characters. They're just generic stereotypes, slasher movie victims, or as we've been saying here. So yeah, it's hard to compare this to one of the greatest films of all time, but it's such an odd franchise, the Jaws movies. But I do agree, 2.5 out of 5 dorsal fins for me. What about you, Brandon?
I'm not changing nothing. I like this movie a lot.